Hello, everyone. We'd like to start with explaining briefly what IFC's life and fire safety requirements are. And this is important because good practice notes, which we will be presenting today, are intended to be supplementary to the core IFC's life and fire safety requirements. So IFC first published its life and fire safety guidelines in 2001. In a way, it was driven by a large hotel fire which happened in late 90s in Thailand and unfortunately killed more than 90 people. It was not IFC's investment, but it served like a trigger for IFC management to understand how critical life and fire safety risks are, because hotels by that time were quite traditional area of IFC's finance. Since 2006, when IFC introduced its performance standards on environmental and social sustainability, a life and fire safety theme falls within Performance Standard 4, Community Health, Safety and Security, and it is underlined under its infrastructure and equipment safety requirements. And it is further defined in the Section 3.3 of the World Bank Group General Environmental Health and Safety Guidelines. So that's where you can find the core life and fire safety requirements of IFC, which reads as the following. All new buildings accessible to the public should be designed, constructed, and operated in full compliance with local building codes and regulations and in accordance with an internationally accepted life and fire safety standards. In other words, when IFC invests in buildings accessible to the public, such buildings should not only comply with local, but be designed in accordance with internationally accepted life and fire safety standards. Examples of public buildings include hotels, universities, hospitals, cinemas, airports, and others. And these are the types of buildings where people unfamiliar with the building layout, such as hotel guests, or people who are unable to evacuate on their own, like hospital patients, could be involved in emergency. And that is exactly why higher standards apply. This slide demonstrates why local standards are not an acceptable benchmark for IFC. The diagram shows fire death rates relative to population per 100,000 inhabitants. This is based on the data provided by International Center of Fire Statistics. And in my part of the world, among countries which report, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan demonstrate much higher numbers, unfortunately, compared to the median of 1.1, and much higher numbers compared to Western countries. And these are examples of markets where IFC operates. So why these numbers are that high? First of all, some countries have gaps in minimum life and fire safety requirements, or there are some deficiencies in permitting procedures, or equally important, there are deficiencies on operational phase. So it is important to understand that fire could happen anytime and anywhere, but consequences of fire will very much depend on how properly life and fire safety systems are designed and operated, and how prepared companies are for emergency response. So these are pictures from IFC's site visits. So this is quite common for countries where we operate. So you see fire doors being kept open, or evacuation routes being blocked with goods, or even worse, you can see evacuation doors being locked. So if to try to summarize what are key problems which we see in life and fire safety in emerging markets, we can say that clients, in fact, companies, they do invest in fire safety because they're pretty much compliance driven. But again, due to some gaps in local codes and regulations and due to operational negligence, consequences of fire in emerging markets are generally much more severe due to the lack or improper performance of protective life and fire safety systems and low emergency readiness. And that's exactly why, and that is in fact demonstrated by the numbers which were shown in my previous slide. Okay, now, how does IFC ensure that its core requirements are being met in the projects? Central aspect of IFC's guidelines is the requirement to certify compliance with the internationally accepted life and fire safety code by a qualified professional. And IFC is implementing three-phase approach. So we first require verification on a concept design stage when master plan is being developed. Then we make sure that those requirements of master plan are being translated into engineering design, and again, this should be certified by the suitably qualified professional. And then we require certification on the post-construction phase to make sure that building was built as designed. But as we discussed already, only good design is not enough. And continuous and sound management of life and fire safety risks at the operational phase is no less important. IFC's Performance Standard 1, which talks about management systems, provides good guidance and describes key elements of sound management systems, and it's fully applicable to life and fire safety. To summarize, the IFC guidelines formulate key requirements and focus how IFC ensures that how IFC verifies that projects are meeting this requirement. So no specific requirements are further defined in IFC's guidelines because, of course, those will pretty much depend on the nature and extent of fire safety. So the nature and extent of fire safety systems will pretty much depend on the building type, or on the occupancy type, and many other factors. So IFC requirements are code-based. But at some point, we felt that there is a big need to develop some supplementary documents in which specific risks and specific design requirements and specific operational requirements will be defined for particular occupancy. We felt that it will really help project teams early in the process to be able to define key difference between local requirements and international requirements and associated additional costs which are needed to bring the building in compliance with international standards. Also, we felt that IFC clients and IFC primarily will pretty much benefit from having useful practical documents like checklists and maintenance schedule, which we could use in the operational stage of the project. So with this aim, we appointed FPC Risk company to develop 2 pilot good practice notes for hotels and hospitals. And IFC specialists closely worked with FPC to make it as practical as possible. Now I'm happy to report that these documents have been completed. They are available at IFC's website, and we are presenting those today. And with this word, I'm passing the floor to Ralf, the director of FPC Risk company, who will be able to explain the content and the structure of this document.
Thank you, Elena. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're logged into. My name is Ralf Bruyninckx from FPC Risk, and as Elena already informed you, I will try to take you for the next 10 to 15 minutes to give you a little bit of a flavor of the content of the documents, of the 2 guidelines that are developed and out at this point. First of all, let me tell you just a few words on what's the basis for these good practice notes. Obviously, they were not produced out of the blue, so they were, based on several, international guideline standards that do exist and are available. So that was definitely one of the more important starting points of the document. Obviously, practical experience came in, especially on the operational side. A lot of hospitals, hotels are visited by colleagues over the last 20, 30 years. So you'll find some practical information in the practice notes readily available. Document is based also on statistical data on fire hazards, where they are in hospitals generally and in hospitals. Some new technologies are touched upon. Water mist systems are more and more used in hospitals right now. So find some information back on that. And risk analysis techniques are also used as kind of an alternative to come up with solutions for protecting these typical occupancies. Now, the life and fire safety objectives that should always be achieved by a project team when designing a building, and which also, a basic assumption of these documents are, first of all, safe evacuation. So in the practice notes, you'll find quite a bit of information how occupants can be evacuated, what recommendations are for compartmentation, for emergency lighting, etc. Also, as a secondary objective, very important, especially in hospital occupancies, how to limit fire and smoke spread and restrict it to the room of fire origin. Important for people that are dealing with restricted mobility. And obviously often overlooked, but how do we allow for a safe intervention for a fire brigade? Talking here about standpipes, easy access to the buildings, smoke management systems that would allow a fire brigade to do an evacuation or assist into evacuation and also to safely intervene. The fire safety objectives are really a combination of fire protection systems, technical provisions, but also operational measurements, preparedness of staff, emergency drills, and emergency planning. The structure of the document contains basically two main parts. The first part is a description of the specific components of fire protection. I get a little bit more into detail on a second or a next slide. Also on the different fire safety approaches that can be used before starting a project. As most of you probably know, you can either follow a full prescriptive based, but there's room for performance-based design as well. So that's been discussed or touched upon. And then there are 4 annexes that give some practical information for, as you can see on the slide, the key design principles that should be used during every project. Some audit aspects, obviously, from an operational phase. Buildings need to be revisited from time to time to see whether all key life and fire safety principles are still operating and reliable. A colleague of mine later on will talk more about inspection and maintenance, which is very important and which is often overlooked.
Hi, Ralph, sorry, we lost your audio.
Okay, sorry. Yep, I'm back in.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, sorry. So inspection and maintenance, again, needs to be done. And very important and also often lacking is proper fire safety documentation. I'll get to that later on. So, just a small word on specific fire safety risks and specific challenges in those 2 occupancies where the practice notes are developed for. yeah, a little bit similar. People are unfamiliar with buildings, whether they're in hospitals or hotels, with obviously an additional challenge in the hospital occupancy, where we deal with people with restricted mobility. Hence, a heavy focus on defend-in-place strategies in the hospital industry. People that are immobile or not mobile, they can't evacuate alone. So fire protection systems are not the only thing there, but how do we get the people to a safe area of retreat? More in particular, compartments are necessary. Fire safety compartments are necessary on every floor level, where occupants can safely wait until the fire brigade arrives for a safe evacuation. Specific risks in hospitals are surgery rooms. There's also presence of oxygen and oxygen transportation, which is also additional fire risks or an additional spread, fire risk spread, which needs to be dealt with. Bed linen, of course. So there's information on fire prevention and the importance of using, fire-rated mattresses, which is often a cause of fires in hospitals. When we look at the hotel industry, they become more and more complex from a design perspective. Complex areas combined with conference rooms, sleeping areas, back of the house areas. Most fires start in the back of the house areas in hotels, kitchens, for example. How can they be compartmented from the remainder of the building in the back of the house areas? Is information that can be found in the practice notes. So the chapter on the specific fire safety risks should create enough awareness here. Different fire safety components, as you can see, are touched upon. Fire prevention, as already indicated. Compartmentation of the building, of shafts, evacuation, fire extinguishment, are sprinklers required or not? Often a big discussion with architects, project sponsors, etc., especially in hospitals, where people are concerned about sensitive, very expensive equipment. From experience, people don't really understand how a sprinkler, to my surprise, still don't really understand how a sprinkler system works, but it's still the most reliable system that is in place, and especially in areas where people cannot move or are impaired, sometimes it's better to choose for an active protection systems. Also in surgery rooms, it's better to control a fire and have your equipment ruined than letting a fire spread and having to deal with other consequences there. My colleague will tell you a little bit more about emergency response and the importance of that in both occupancies, which is often underrated. So all these components are addressed in the good practice notes. There are some more, but these are the most important ones and the basic cornerstones. Here, maybe the slide is not clear, but the purpose of the slide is more of giving you some information or the reader some information on costs. As I said, sprinkler systems, it's a heavy cost. A detection and alarm system, which is always recommended and mostly required by local standards and codes. But what is the average cost? So a project team can in an early phase of the project can make a rough estimate of the costs that will involve the installation of different types of systems. If I'm not mistaken, I think we give an average cost for detection and alarm, or it's given in the documents, and also on. Yep, I'm back. And also on sprinkler protection. Obviously, the average cost for sprinkling an existing building or hotel is much higher, or significantly higher, as you can see, as when designing a complete new building. Upgrading an existing hospital or hotel while it's in operation is not an easy thing to do. or fitting it or retrofitting it with a sprinkler system. As the last slide here for my part, I'd like to focus some attention on documentation, which is very important as a delivery in the different phases of a project. And actually, we divide a project in 4 phases: concept, detailed design, installation, and operation. The documentation in a concept design is a life and fire safety master plan, which is the main framework, or the main Bible, in fact, of the life and fire safety aspects, in which describes all the life and fire safety aspects that will be installed inside the building. That should be done locally by local consultants, but should also be approved by a peer, basically an approved consultant. Then next you get into the detailed design phase. So a detailed design documentation should be produced by the project team of the specific fire protection systems that are installed or should be installed: sprinklers, detection, alarm, compartmentation. Then we get into the installation phase of a project, where certificates are required, the fire doors, etc., where installation is done, good practices need to be followed, and documents need to be produced that need to be checked by an IFC approved contractor. Obviously, at the end of the installation, a testing and commissioning phase is organized to see whether everything is installed and designed, is installed in line with the design, and everything will work appropriately. As a last phase, during the operation of the hotel, several documents are also can be consulted or should be produced for due diligence purposes. So every year or every 3 years, a property should be visited and to verify whether appropriate training has been done and the systems still operate as designed for. Thank you very much for your attention. That's it for my part.
Okay, so now we'll pause for Q&A. If you have any questions, please send them in. There is one question we have. Would you say that there is a recommended time period for review of fire procedures and policies? The same applies to monitoring and inspection. Obviously, any new regulations, legislation, but as a rule of thumb, would you say minimum every 3, 4, 5 years or less?
Who's going to put that?
Ralf, is that something that you can answer, that question?
Yeah, sure. Rashnika, can you repeat one more time, please?
Okay. Would you say that there is a recommended time period for review of fire procedures and policies? The same applies to monitoring and inspection. Obviously, any new regulations, legislation, but as a rule of thumb, would you say a minimum every 3, 4, 5 years or less?
I think as a rule of thumb, well, there are guidelines. There's a difference between organization of training, testing, commissioning. Some guidelines say, for testing, I know even every, 3 times a year. I think in our guidelines we recommend once a year for testing fire protection systems and doing drills. For reviewing policies, I think that's on a much higher level. I would recommend as a rule of thumb, to my knowledge, there's no information existing on that, but I would say 3 years as a rule of thumb to see whether any major changes exist in occupancies and whether you have to react as a property owner. Would that address the question? Or I don't know whether the person who asked this question needs more clarification.
Yes, she said thank you very much. We have another question. As part of a financing project of an existing hotel or hospital, would you recommend a dedicated life and fire safety due diligence done by a specialist instead of an E&S generalist?
Well, the answer is yes, depending on the type of modification that you will perform in the building. I'm going to explain a little bit about that later in the second part of the presentation, but if the renovation of whatever the work, the scope of the work that is done in that particular hotel or hospital or other public access building, you will require a life and fire safety engineer to perform a risk-based analysis, and then also take a look at how the renovation will impact the existing portion. I think that's important. I mean, it depends on the scope of the review, the scope of the renovation, and how it impacts the existing portion of the building.
Okay. That person continued and said, is it actually what IFC requires?
Actually, yes. I mean, I'm going to talk about that now in a moment.
Okay. Okay. We have one other question that came in. Who will certify the master plan and design projects? The project owners assign life and fire safety design firms, and these firms develop master plan and design projects. In addition to the life and fire safety design firm, another third-party life and fire safety expert is required?
I mean, the answer is no if the original master plan was done by a third-party life and fire safety company or engineer. If the master plan was developed by the architectural company engaged by the owner, maybe, I mean, in those cases, a third party is required as a peer review and then give the certification. Those are basically the two cases. Normally, of course, you want to have an independent view on this and receive the certification as part of the financial structure and deal.
I would like to add maybe, because in local markets, in emerging markets, unfortunately, there are not many, let's say, architectural firms that are aware of international standards. So they design according to local standards. So in these markets, for us, yes, it's important that there is a, let's say, third party which will verify, that the design is comparable, let's say, with internationally acceptable codes. So it depends from market to market.
Okay, thank you all for answering questions. We'll continue on with Luis.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Roshanika, Ralf, and Elena. I will now be talking on the second part of the presentation, and I will be discussing about the information presented on the Annex B and C. Also, we're going to talk about the typical cases on financial structure. It's going to answer part of the question that was asked before. And at the end, I'm going to touch on emergency planning. When we take a look at the approval flow, or using these slides to get into this point, generally the focus on building owners and environmental specialists and other people related to the project is the focus on the design and installation and then the commissioning of the building. And sometimes after 3-4 years, we see that when we go and perform a supervision or an audit or an inspection, we see that the life and fire safety system has been forgotten, or sometimes they're neglected, or not necessarily are in the best operational conditions, and including also features of emergency planning, etc. So right now, and with the use of the good practice notes and other tools that we have implemented in IFC, we would like to have a better manage of the life cycle of the facility, and be sure that the client has implemented, or the building owner has implemented, a systematic way for managing changes with a good maintenance program and a proper documentation. This is key, also maintaining the documentation and the paper trail of this information. This also can be extrapolated to evaluate existing buildings, where the approval of the fire protection measures will be based on a technical due diligence by the environmental and social specialist or life and fire safety engineer, and application of a risk-based assessment, as Elena mentioned at the beginning. The difference in these two is that risk-based is going to see a building that is existing and is going to evaluate it from a risk perspective, and not so much if the building is in compliance with existing codes, unless the building is going to be renovated. Now, when getting now on the financial structures that we normally identify at IFC, you can see in the slide, normally we have these four typical cases. One case is when the proceeds or the money goes to a new building, which you have the design being agreed or not, or you have a new building with existing buildings to be renovated, or you have a new with existing buildings to remain intact, or only existing with that are going to be renovated or not. All these cases have particular challenges, and they have to be seen independently in some cases, and ensure that we cover all the aspects, ensure that we have a proper action plan to cover the issues that we might encounter or the gap that we may encounter. This has additional complexity when the building is when the financial structure includes equity or it's a corporate loan. Then the GPM will guide to help identify the life and fire elements that require improvement and create an action plan. And other issue that we normally see is about the definition of a major renovation. What is a major renovation? It's not sometimes straightforward. We have to ask questions like, for example, is the improvement cost greater or larger than 50% of the value of the building or that portion of the building without including the cost of the structure? This correlation actually is not used often these days because it's difficult to apply. But for example, you see if the work area exceeds 50% of the building area, or if there is an extension or an addition, or the building is going to be higher or taller, etc. If also important, if there is any change of occupancy in the building, then will trigger and will be defined as a major renovation. Or if there is a mechanical, electrical, plumbing system installed new in the building, replaced, that will represent a big investment and changes, that will also be considered a major renovation. So in these cases, if we answer yes to any of these questions, then the building will be considered as new, and then this will trigger the requirement for new for the building to comply with existing codes or today's code. When we see life and fire safety systems from an operation and maintenance point of view, we see that there is a main difference between life and fire safety and other building systems. For example, other building systems, I'm talking about heat, ventilation, and air conditioning, electrical system, elevators, electronic security, CCTV, etc. And the main difference is the way they're used and audited during the life of the building. For example, if you have your security access card and you use it every day, you pass through the door and open. The day that key doesn't work, you call the maintenance people and they add you again to the system, or they see if there was a problem with the card reader, etc., or the lock, etc. So the same for the other buildings. If you go to your office and you see that the air conditioning is not working, you call and then it's maintained, the CCTV, etc., elevators. The life and fire safety systems are there. You are not sure if at some point they're operational, and the only way to ensure that they're working is with a strict testing and maintenance program that should be implemented in the building. And there should be a record of all this maintenance and testing performed on those systems, including fire alarm, fire protection, means of egress, etc., housekeeping. Now, entering on life and fire safety system and how in the GPN explained how to make an audit or an evaluation of these systems. We have Annex B. This section is made as a questionnaire or a checklist format in order to guide the owner and specialists to identify issues and deficiencies during the life of the facility. When you see the Annex B is very simple in nature. It can be used in any environment, and the important part is that it evaluates not only the systems, let's call them the hardware on the building, the fire alarm system, fire protection again, etc., emergency lighting, but also asks questions about how the building is managing housekeeping, hazmat, hazardous materials, and how the personnel and has been trained on the use of life and fire safety system and on emergency response. That is the other side of the coin that on which you have the software to be a complete system between all the hardware and the software together. One practical example, I wanted to bring two practical examples to show. On the left-hand side of the slide, we have an example of a hotel room, a guest room that is used for a disabled person, and that those rooms use, of course, it's a sleeping room, and additionally, it's used for a disabled person. It could be a hearing impaired person, and then not for the sleeping room condition, we have, for example, to have to use a detector that has a built-in buzzer or a horn that sounds when the smoke is detected in a way that we try to wake up the person that is sleeping. And the intention is shown in the GPN in a way that we want to save the person that is directly related with the fire, and also the person that is away in another floor of the building. So we would like to also be sure on the GPN that since for example, for a hearing impaired person, we have to provide in that room a flashing light or a strobe light that will notify the person. Also, we can use what we call here in the US a distributed recipient system that is basically, for example, a shaker in the bed or a pillow shaker, or sometimes the person is given a pager, etc. So those systems will help to notify these persons in a hotel room with these characteristics. Also, the second example on the right-hand side of the slide is for a hospital, and I want to highlight here that we have the requirements for fire separations and fire compartmentation or smoke compartmentation, and during the design this is done. And you can see, for example, the green line is a smoke barrier, 1 hour smoke barrier line wall. We have red showing 2 hour separations on the stairs shaft, elevator shaft, and other rooms, and 1 hour, etc. But what is important here is that this information sometimes is lost, that it's not given to the maintenance people. So when they're during some renovation of work that is done, they can penetrate that wall with a new pipe or dot work, etc., and then the penetration is not sealed, and it loses the capacity to contain the fire or the smoke. So that is important, and it's highlighted in the GPN that we need to have this information done at the beginning during the master planning, then maintain the information, and then use it for the maintenance people during the life of the facility. On maintenance, the Annex C is very practical, in my opinion. We have shown the basics to develop a maintenance plan. On these tables, on the Annex C, we show on the top what systems are life and fire safeties are mentioned. On the left-hand side column, we have frequencies that are explained as, for example, weekly, monthly, annually, or semi-annually, every 5 years, etc. No? And then it's very, for example, you go with the, what type of system you have in the building, you evaluate, they give you also a hint of how the testing and maintenance should be done. Also on the test of the GPN you will see that there is some information about how to perform that testing. And also the tables are in a color code mode. I mean, you see, for example, 3 different colors on the table, green, blue, and salmon, or whatever color. And, the first one is by the building owner or some representative of the owner. It can be maintenance people. Then the second is by a maintenance contractor. It could be the fire alarm contractor or a sprinkler contractor. And then the one in pink is served by a certified accredited body. And these are shown like this just because of the complexity and the responsibility to certify some system. Finally, of course, the GPN are not. Excuse me, we're having some feedback. The GPNs are not. It's not fully detailed on how to develop an emergency response plan. Normally the owner will follow or the building environmental and health and safety management will develop the emergency response plan based on local regulation and international regulations. And these international regulations are, for example, ISO, World Health Organization, the Eurocodes, NFPA, FEMA, OSHA, etc., etc. No? So then what is in the GPN is that we want to show the tendency and what is particular for these two occupancies, hospitals and hotels. For example, when you see the tendency in a hospital is to have larger hospitals with more area, higher hospitals, and also one thing that is happening or has happened in the last 10 or 15 years is that let's say before 10 years or 15 years ago, you will have a broken leg and you will go be operated and then stay in the hospital. These days, these type of procedures are done in a way that you go home. So what is the tendency in a hospital is that people that remain in the hospital and are sleeping overnight are people that are sicker, they have a higher degree of disability, they cannot move, or they are in ICU, etc. So the second tendency is that many countries and regions, etc., they're saying to the hospitals and hotels, you have to be self-prepared to manage emergencies. Sometimes it's good, we can send the fire department to help you, but at the beginning of the emergency, you have to be self-sufficient. So for this type of risk, we in the GPN mentioned some of the what is important to what is important to follow under, for example, a hospital or a hotel. In a hotel, the important part is to manage the different type of occupancies. Ralf mentioned, for example, in a hotel you can have a casino, a kitchen, a restaurant, areas that for leisure, pool deck, etc., that is inside the building, and also you have the guests. So the emergency planning for a hotel will guide the evacuation, for example, to be sure that if the fire is on the casino area, you don't evacuate the building, and vice versa, but at least on the first stages of the fire. And then, the one thing that the hotel has important is that, for example, that they don't want to disturb the patient, the guest, and be sure that there are no nuisance alarms. But also, every time when you have a real fire and confirmation of that fire, then the evacuation starts. And then they manage disabled guests, and they do a phase evacuation per floor. And those are the two main differences, for example, in a hospital and a hotel. For other occupancies, similar analysis will have to be done. No? Now, I would like to pass it to Elena for the final conclusions and remarks. Thank you.
So as a conclusion note, I would like to say that designing for zero risk is not achievable, but IFC is acting to the best of our ability to minimize life and fire safety risks, also through awareness raising and knowledge transfer. So the good practice notes which were presented to you today is the example of the knowledge product, which is primarily intended to be used by IFC project teams. However, we hope that these documents will be useful for broader group of specialists, and they could be used by industries. So please visit IFC's website, please download these documents, and if you have any other questions, you can ask them now, or you can send those to email addresses which are provided in our presentation. So technical questions could be addressed to Ralf from FPC, or to Luis from IFC, and I will be happy to answer any IFC-related questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. So we have time for another Q&A. If you have any questions, please send them in. A couple of questions we have. What is the difference between a master plan and the life and fire safety drawings for a building?
Okay, I'll take that one, Rashanika, if that's okay. The life and fire master plan sets out, the basic principles of the fire protection of the building on a functional level, not on a system design level. So the life and fire safety master plan are the several components, as were explained into the presentation, which address evacuation, compartmentation. Are sprinklers required, yes or no? What level of compartmentation is required, but not to the amount of detail that's in design documents. So a design documentation details, how the sprinkler system should be designed in line with what standards, what capabilities should the fire pumps have, how should tests be done on the sprinkler system. So it's another level of detail. The Life and Fire Safety Master Plan is the Bible when it concerns the fire safety of the property. And that can change, obviously, over the years, the master plan. And the design documentation is the more detailed, works for the installation of the systems. Is that a proper answer to the question?
Yes,
I guess so.
Yes, thank you. Another question, what is the recommended frequency for fire drills in hospitals, and what is the best approach to manage fire drills in the presence of patients to minimize disturbance and still have a meaningful drill?
Yes, I can take that. Thank you, Ralf. The second or the first portion of the question is how you manage evacuations in a hospital. The important thing to remember is that in a hospital you have to maintain the health environment for the patient as long as you can. So the best strategy is to move patient horizontally. In that diagram that I had on my second example, you will see, for example, there was a smoke barrier between two small compartments or creating two small compartments. In this case, to maintain the health environment of the patients, you move them from left to right or left to right, from one compartment to the other. Then you have all the equipment, nurses, etc., maintaining. In the meanwhile, they do a triage of the patients and they classify, what patients can be moved or not, or what is the priorities, and then start the evacuation if it's necessary. You have to keep that in mind. Then the second portion, what is the frequency? Normally, we recommend to have practices every minimum twice a year. It doesn't have to be a total practice. It can be done by floors or areas of the building. Also, one thing is very important to keep in mind that you don't use real patients. You can have people who are, acting as patients with all the limitations, etc. The important is for the nurses and other people in the hospital to practice to move these patients from one side or the other, and then actually take them down through the stairs or using elevators, etc. If you have, for example, a school nearby or a college, you can go and then ask for volunteers to act as patients, or if there is a military school, etc., you can ask them. It's very difficult to do that. Try not to use real patients unless they have agreed on doing so. Especially, you can ask also the patient, and have to ask also, the family visiting that patient. But doing twice a year, or two practices per year, maintaining, all trying to make it as real as possible, and not using patients and doing the drill. I answered everything, right? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Another question, are there any code-based minimum prescriptive requirements related to life safety and egress of hotels and similar building types, such as dormitories? Some countries where I work do not have well-developed codes that would prevent things like dead-end corridors.
The EHS guidelines and life and fire safety section of the EHS guidelines indicates the use of 6 or 7 of international codes that are acceptable for IFC, and the reason for that is because these codes actually are more developed, and they include features like the one asking on the question about the dents. But the important part is to have a specialized person doing the analysis. That first they can do a gap analysis between the local and the international code, and then develop the master plan based on that. But the regulations are there. They have, for example, in the US, you cannot have a dead end of more than 6 meters, etc., or 15 meters if the building has some characteristics. But the performance that you want to achieve is that once you pass the exit door, imagine that you are in a smoke, in a corridor filled with smoke. When you pass that exit door, you don't want to go too far to have to come back. So that is the performance that you want. If one code says 5 meters, another says 7, etc., but the idea is to have limitation on that. So when you pass that exit, you get to the end of the corridor, and then you come back and find the exit. So the evacuation is managed that way. So it's the performance that we want to achieve. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Another question, are there any cases that a company faced difficulties with approval of life and fire safety measures designed in accordance with international standards with a local fire agency?
If you want, I can address that. Yeah, well, that's always a challenge, of course. I recall in Russia a couple of projects done where, you're a couple of years ago where, you have international or, let's say, American NFPA guidelines, and then you have the Russian standards, which are, have another, they have a different vision, basically, and it's not, well, it's equally good, but it's always the challenge of how to, for international organizations, how to comply with local regulations and see that you don't do an over-design of the building. Obviously, you have to comply with local standards and regulations, otherwise you're not allowed to build, first of all. But secondly, you have to watch out that you don't overdo it as well. So when you put international standards on top of local heavy standards, and this is in case of Russian SNIP regulations, it's, then you're going to have a complete over-design. So you should watch out there, and it's obviously, often a discussion with the fire brigade and with the project team of, what's the level of fire safety that you're going to apply. And that's, laid out in the master plan as well. But obviously you have to choose one regulation. You can't mix those things. But, every building is different, every country is different, so it's always an interpretation, especially, in those type of occupancies that we addressed, hospitals and hotels, which are often atypical. You can never exactly comply with the local standards. There will always be derogations or derivatives from local standards. So it's always, it's never yes or no. It's never black or white. Sorry, that's what I wanted to say. So you always have to talk and go into negotiation with the local fire brigade.
Actually, I want to complement. I had an example in South America where the following an FPA code building for local regulation, they have, for example, one standpipe, and the owner, following international code, installed the second one, and then the fire department, the local fire department, was asking the owner to dismantle this, and then of course we needed to explain, no, this is additional protection, etc. They were alleging that second standpipe will create confusion during emergencies, etc. But then at the end it was, well seen. So we also find this type of pushback sometimes for local when they see something that they're not familiar with, or have a difference between what they normally do. Yeah, we find that type of cases.
Okay, I think that's all the time that we have. So thank you everyone for attending today. You see on the last slide there's email addresses for Elena, Luis, and Ralf, or you can contact the IFC by writing to asksustainability@ifc.org. It's all one word. And at the bottom you'll see the evaluation link. So please take a minute to evaluate today's webinar, and we'll also follow up with an email that includes the evaluation link, and we'll let you know when the webinar recording and presentation have been posted to IFC's website. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.